So Greg, please introduce yourself and to all the wonderful 10 listeners that I have.
All right, guys. All right, the 10 of you. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Greg Chaplin. And as I say in the beginning of all my videos, I'm a physical therapist and strength and conditioning specialist. And I'm Boston based here. I guess that's kind of who I am, what my credentials are. And then I guess the tidbit about me that might be interesting we can dive into if you think it is that in my past life, which was the most of my life before about 10 years ago, I was like a pretty serious musician. And so my undergrad's actually in music. And I kind of feel like almost an imposter to this rehab and fitness world, but I've been in it for like 10 years now. So it's kind of been a weird journey. And now I'm here and yeah, I love it. But there's, every day I feel like we got new questions to ask, and it's just it's the Wild West out here in the fitness and rehab industries. I feel like
Definitely, especially with the internet. Everyone's making claims, all kinds of things. But I mean, wait, never mind. I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole right now. But I definitely am curious about how in the world did you go from being a musical undergrad person to getting your DPT and going that route? So I'm sure you've explained this like 50,000 times, but
yeah. So literally, I just started journaling this year, which is like a new habit, which I highly recommend. And so I write all sorts of things down in this journal, including like video ideas. So I literally wrote this big entry recently about the most common question I get asked. It's literally, how did you go from being a musician to becoming a physical therapist? And so I got all sorts of lengths of this story, but I'll try to keep it relatively short and sweet. So I started playing music when I was about 7 years old. So by the time I was, let's say, 12, I was probably playing about 150 shows a year. So yeah, like around the Boston, Newport areas. And then after that, I was like all over the country.
Shows, like what, how many people are at these shows?
Yeah. So it depends, right? Like if it's a swanky kind of corporate thing, you might have a couple hundred people. If it's at a bar room, you might have 50 people.
You were at
if it's
12
in a
years old
performance
and
venue.
12 years old in bars, like playing music.
So you could still, when I started playing in bar rooms, you could still smoke in bars up here in Massachusetts, which was probably back around like 2012 or 2002 rather, 2003. And so I would come home on a Sunday night, every Sunday night on a school night, reeking of cigarettes. And my mom's like, yeah, you got to shower, before you're allowed to come upstairs. It's like 10 p.m., 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. And it was like, as long as you can keep your grades up, then you can do what you got to do. And my older brother, who's 3 years older, he's a really good pianist. So we had a crap load of gigs for a while there. And it was like on the job training. So, I got really good really quick. And so fast forward, like I was 12 then. By the time I was 17, I was graduating high school a year early with a full ride to Berklee College of Music. So I literally thought at that point in my life that was what I was going to do forever. No questions asked. Like you ever talk to an 18-year-old and they think they really know what they want to do?
Right.
That's kind of where I was at. And I think for probably a number of reasons, some of which I could probably explain now and some which I probably still can't. Within about a year, I just was kind of riddled with, body aches and pains and some different, injuries, if you will, air quotes injuries. And it was started this whole process of, oh, let me try to like figure this out. You go through the traditional channels and you can't get the answers you want or that you're looking for or the relief. And then it becomes this thing of its own where it's like, okay, now, I've kind of failed this traditional route. Let me figure it out. And we could dive into whether I think that's actually a good idea to do. I have a little bit more insight now that it's 10 years later. But, so then I became a trainer and I thought if I'm a trainer, I'll know what to do, and then you train people. And it was a similar thing. So I was like, within 3 months of training, I was probably seeing 40 or 50 people a week, just timing wise, like one-on-one sessions. So I've had the opportunity and the kind of the privilege of being one-on-one for long durations of time with people pretty much all of my days for like the last 10 years, with the exception of PT school, which got thrown into the mix after about 3 years of training. I was like, I still don't know enough. So let me go back and I'll get the doctorate because it sounded really big and fancy. Like, oh, if I'm a doctor, I'm gonna know everything, right? And then you end up getting
Obviously.
that degree. You come out, and I just remember the realization of coming out and having these fancy letters behind the name, and then A, realizing they're not that fancy, and B, realizing that you actually didn't know everything. In fact, you still didn't know anything. And
Yeah.
just going through that whole process of saying, okay, well, now that I like am supposed to know it, can I actually get the changes I want for myself at this point? That answer was still no. And so then you get sent on this path of trying to figure out, okay, so what are the things I can learn to move this in the right direction? And I think the further I got into it, the more, you come to these conclusions of it's really never one thing. Right. And I think a lot of your content speaks to that point, and that's why I think your content is hitting where my mindset's at kind of 10 years into the game, like at this perfect zone. So that is the short long version of my story.
I just feel like there's some drunk guy who came up to you while you're playing piano and be like, hey, it's a good idea. You should be a doctor of physical therapy. And just telling you, hey, you should go this route. I
Oh
cannot
man.
imagine being that age and playing music during, oh my gosh, man. I was laying in bed watching Law and Order SVU like
I mean,
when
I
I
would
was a
I would
kid.
still do that, man. Olivia Benson was a babe.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but it was funny because I led a very normal life like during the day, but in the evenings and later on into high school, I mean, I was traveling, you know, played at the Kennedy Center a couple of times, played, out for the Grammy Foundation a couple of times. Um, you know, could have gone to Juilliard if that was what I wanted to do, and you just kind of felt at that point like you had like the whole world figured out. Um, and then you realize like these experiences people have with injury and not knowing how to work through them, and not understanding like the bigger picture, it can really throw you for a loop, and I would like to think that if I had the same experience now, I'd have other tools to be able to manage that and navigate that. Um, but at that point in my life, it was just like devastating to have sort of any physical challenge arise,
Mhm.
because then it just became not fun to play anymore,
Right.
you know.
Can't enjoy it.
And I'm sure you've seen this with like you ever work with youth athletes?
Oh, yeah.
So you get the young baseball player who comes in. He's got like decent velo for his age, and he's like, starting to get some interest.
Hmm.
But he's one of these kids who's probably specialized a little bit early, right? He's probably being pushed a little too hard with the training, and then he starts to kind of fall apart. And you could just see he's not loving the game anymore, and you start to lose the identity too. So he's looking at himself as like a baseball player, and then all of a sudden you can't do baseball for a little bit, and it's like, well, who am I? Who am I now? Everyone is asking me, when are you going to get back to baseball? When are you back out there? And you're going through that process of trying to just heal and figure yourself out. And I think a lot of that kind of intersects, and then you get these moments where it's like you might not be cut out to do this thing. This might not be in the cards for you, and you might have to come to terms with that. Um, and that was like what happened to me. And I see it with these baseball players, and yeah, I often wonder if that is a case of just the training error piece of it, or if that break is actually sort of a moment for you to ask questions about, why am I doing this? Is this actually something I want to do? Is this actually me? Or um, is there something else I could be doing? So it's like that everything happens for a reason kind of concept. Who knows?
Definitely. Well, and I think that specialization, like with specialization, you get tunnel vision in a lot of ways. And then, like you said, you come out and you actually come up for a breath of air. And it's like, is this really how I want to spend my time for X amount of years of my life? I had that realization back. Oh man, actually, it was applying to DPT school, and like didn't get in the first round,
Oh God.
and I was like, oh my gosh. And I, came up, I was like cramming for the GRE, like just caffeinated, all like cortisol through the roof, all this stuff. And
Yeah.
I got all the letters back and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? And there was a 3 month span of like identity crisis. What do I do with myself? Who am I supposed to be? What am I going to do with the next year of my life? It's terrible. Like it's one of the hardest things you have to come to terms with. But I think too, with that, especially youth athletes and just athletics in general, like that's probably one of the biggest, like it's sort of a mind shift that people have to make and decisions that they have to make. And they almost have too much time on their hands because now they can't practice.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's hard because for them, like the thing that they loved, you know, if it's, let's say it's baseball, and they love playing baseball, then they get into being a pitcher, and they start to love not only the game itself, but all the things that come attached to that as well.
Mhm.
So they start to identify with being the pitcher of their team first, and then they start to identify with being one of the better pitchers in the area next.
Right.
And then if they can take it to that next level, it's like, oh, you're one of the better pitchers in your conference or whatever, and it keeps going
Mhm.
out. And that identification with that is like when you separate from the day to day of being in that mode and getting all that, praise that you're used to or whatever, and that goes away like in an instant. I think it makes you realize, yeah, you're just another dude, and you got to be okay with just being another dude. You can't base your life on this identity that you have that's tied to some sort of competence that you have.
Right.
There's more than just being competent, and being recognized for that to life, and like
Definitely.
those are the
And
deep questions your young athletes, they don't even know that they're trying to answer those questions half the time, you know?
mhm. Well, I think a lot of the time too, they're spent dreaming. It's like, oh, I read the story of, for example, a pitcher, like they started here and they overcame and they became this. And they start to see their future. And then when that's taken away, like you said, not only is their identity crumbling, their whole dream of what they thought their future should be like, it's just gone in an instant.
Yeah, and then the kind of like the sense is like, oh, this is unfair,
Mm,
like, and all those kind of things. And then you get this whole resentful kind of point of view, and then no one wants to hang out with you, and the social isolation happens, and it really can snowball out. And I remember, when I was going through it, there was a lot of those things going on. And the problem is, I think it's so close to you that you can't see it,
mm,
in a sense. Like, so your own reaction and your own behavior is like the biggest impediment to you being able to progress, forward. Um, and so it's just you're so close to you, you can't see it. And then everyone else around you is like, man, what's going on? And it's not to say that there's not, these serious physical pain related issues, but it's just like in the chronic pain world, when someone comes in, and as the practitioner, you can see where the line is between where their physical pain is and where their reaction to that pain starts, right? And you can kind of see that a little more clearly, where they see it as all one thing. Like, I can't believe this is happening to me. It's like, well, 20% of that might be the actual what's happening to you, and 80% might be the what you feel like is actually happening to you because of how
right.
you're reacting to it. And that's hard. That's hard to get it,
Let,
wrap your head around.
let's unpack that a little bit. So I think
Sure.
for listeners, like maybe explain for us the like the 20%, like the actual what's happening potentially on a physiological level.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. So whenever you have sort of any injury, you're going to have this, acute phase. And I don't even think we really have to use the word injury. We could just use change. We could just use physical change, right? Like negative physical change, right? Because it doesn't, you don't have to have had something happen,
Mm,
right? necessarily, right? There could be sort of this insidious onset of something that's happening as well. So it's happening for no reason. But there is some physical change, right? And so with that change is going to come some perception that there's been a change, right? And that perception is usually it's a negative change, right? Usually it's related to also some sort of loss in function as well. Okay. So that is the piece that's physical, if you will. So to make a really easy example, imagine that you had like a strain of the ligament in your knee or something like that. You twisted, you planted the wrong way, and then you had a twist in your knee, and one of your ligaments stretched out a little bit, knee swelled up, you had to get like a boot or whatever, and then start crutching around. That's like a really obvious example that a lot of people will probably be able to relate to. So that's sort of the 20% of what happened. Then you get 6 to 8 weeks out in tissue healing wise. So the actual physical injury itself is mostly about as healed up as it's going to be, right? Not that it can't continue to heal up more over time, but let's just say after about 8 weeks, the majority of the healing's gone on. But within that time, between when the injury happened and that 8 weeks, you may have developed certain behaviors around how you move around that knee, right? Some of those might be related to immobilization. Sure, fair enough. But others might be related to your beliefs around that knee and whether you can trust it. And so there's this greater conversation going on in PT right now. And some of the listeners will be familiar and maybe some won't. But it's sort of putting this idea of pain science at the forefront of realizing, okay, what is actually physically happening, and then what is happening as a result of how we might change our behaviors around certain beliefs or expectations. So for example, if you expect there to be pain in that knee, you might not want to shift your weight over it, you might not want to bend it, you might not want to move it in certain ways. You might start to squat down over your other knee all the time. Then next thing you know, your back is kind of feeling a little funky, or your ankle is starting to feel a little bit funky. And you can get into this cycle where you're limiting your actual activities, day to day, and then you're babying this knee, and then your brain and your nervous system starts to perceive any movement over that knee as a threat. And so let's say the initial injury was what that was, and then that piece got worked out. If you still have all these reactions in terms of how you've changed your behavior to that original injury, you might be limiting your function and experiencing painful sensations, but that might not actually be due to the tissue injury anymore, but more these neurological patterns that have happened as you've gone. And I hope that somewhat makes sense.
Right. And so it's a potentially a subconscious, like learned pain response. And
Yeah.
that's kind of how I like to explain it.
So it's interesting, right? I think both of us are probably so let me back up a little bit. I saw a post the other day, and they were making a dichotomy between two types of therapists: those who prioritize the pain science model and those who prioritize the biomechanical model. And so if you imagine it as this continuum, you have people that are focused very much on how the movement is occurring from a mechanical standpoint. And then you have people who are very much focused on how is the movement occurring based on people and their beliefs around pain, and those sort of things. And it's a spectrum, and you don't need to be on one side of it. You can be in the middle, and you can use both. You can.
Would you say it depends on the patient?
I would say it totally depends on the patient. I was just having this conversation earlier today with one of my clients. He's a physio as well, and he was just talking like, there's some people who you work with, and based on your intuitive sense of seeing people day in and day out, you go, oh, they're really not that afraid to move. Like they just need to be moved and told what to do, and they're going to expect that there's going to be maybe some pain along the process, but you get a feel for that they don't need to be educated that much on pain being normal. Like they've already accepted that as part of the process. um, for someone who comes in and there's a 5-year history there, and they got a laundry list of things that's gone on with them, and they have a longer story usually as well, and like their own explanations, like very elaborate explanations of why things have happened, and like they're trying to piece it together and figure it out type thing. Those individuals will typically, and I say those individuals because I was, probably still am, to be honest. Those people need a little bit more talking down off the cliff sometimes, you know?
Right.
These are your people who would tend towards catastrophizing, you know, over the pain, or doing a lot of, you know, incessant Googling about things, trying to information gather. In those sort of behaviors, a lot of times they'll produce anxiety, which then amplifies the pain even more, instead of helping, even though the intention behind those is to figure it out and get better. So it's like a lot of times the right intention, but it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, sort of the problem being so close to you that you can't really see it all the time.
Right.
And that's where I think the education is maybe the primary, you know, intervention
Hmm.
for that person, at least in the beginning.
Right. I know at the end of the day, it comes to interpersonal skills, from the therapist. Like that's what it really is. Just being able to read the room. There's probably the best experience I ever got wasn't working in the clinic, but it was probably being a waiter,
Huh,
because you have to like get over your own ego. You have to be able to talk to people, and you have to be able to do it in an effective manner quickly so that way you can get to the other people,
huh.
because you can't just sit at the table the whole time and talk to someone,
Right, right.
and you got
Yeah,
to get it right the first time.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's like, what do they say? You never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Exactly.
You know,
So
and it, and that's interesting because it's like, so you in rehab, right, and in fitness, we actually do get second chances and third chances and fourth chances and fifth chances, which is like the nice part about it.
mhm,
The problem's really complex, so that's a good thing, right?
right.
Um, but what I find is like, so let's say that person comes in, and we can use me as an example, um, because like any of my colleagues, you know, at the clinic that I was working at, they'll tell you, you know, if I have an injury, I'm like thinking about it, you know, and really too much.
Mhm.
So let's say I come in, and Greg's kind of like, he's a little bit of an anxious guy, and he's like overthinking it a little bit, and he's very identified with his pain. The first day might not be the best day to bring that up, right? Because that's my current belief structure. So if you try to break me out of that on the first day, you might lose the ability to create trust with me. And even though from a like a scientific, you know, systematic review perspective, manual therapy on my knee is not going to be the thing that's going to maybe get me better. It might be the thing that builds trust,
Right.
you know, and that trust is probably more important to the rehab process than anything else.
That, and I would add to it a positive, progressing or empowering experience. Like the fact that you could, even though manual therapy we know may not have long lasting changes, but the fact that someone could feel a reduction in pain, and then they're praised like, hey, you feel that? Like that's what it's like. That's what the goal is. And they have that insight, or it's like, oh, light at the end of the tunnel. That's a possibility. That's huge for people. And then that's what gets the buy-in and the trust. And go
Yeah,
ahead. I know you
it's
want to
it's
add to it.
it's so interesting because you know, I think that there's this interesting thought. You know, I've had this conversation with a lot of people in the rehab field where it's like, do we treat pain or don't we treat pain? You know, um, and I'd love to hear your opinion on that. But some people just say, you know, well, just make it not about the pain. You know, give them other KPIs to focus on. Well, before we worry about the pain, we got to see this, and this happen. Other people say, well, I'm going to try to do something to reduce that pain on day one and get the buy-in and go from there. And I'm not saying either one of those is wrong.
I mean, in my experience, every person that comes and sits on the table, they're there because of pain.
Right. Yeah.
So you're going to get a reduction. Like, even if we are 3 months into a rehab program, I'm still going to ask what you're pain at. Was that, even if they're progressed and they're having minimal pain and it's maybe with 2% of, they've reached to the cabinet to grab something heavy and that kind of twinges, I'm still probably going to I'm going to ask about that
Yeah.
because I want that to go away. I'm also a perfectionist. So I'm trying to make sure that I want to get someone who does 100% if I possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so
Right.
funny. Yeah.
And, but it's something I do want to add to this too, because you're talking about these beliefs. And I think that's a good conversation to have. But that is something that I think fitness and rehab has failed just general population when it comes to posture. Because I can't tell you how many people come to me and they're saying, I have this posture, and then they catastrophize it.
Oh, yeah.
And they believe that that posture is then going to create, an injury down the line, or that it is the cause of other ailments that they have. And
Man, totally. Totally. So, this has been on my mind like more recently than probably ever. Um, so posture is an interesting term. I think just like trying to come up with a definition of postures is an interesting, exercise because
mhm,
it's like, I mean, I think you have a pretty decent amount of experience in the PRI realm. I would guess Postural Restoration Institute. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'm sure most of the people that would listen to this would be pretty familiar.
all 10 of them.
Um, And so Ron, the founder of PRI, he did this 20-minute talk a couple of weeks back that I listened to on like what is posture, because it was the 20th anniversary of PRI, and he went in true Ron style into
Mm,
this huge explanation about all the various factors that have to do with posture, um, which was awesome. And if you can keep up with what he's saying on any level, that's fun to listen to, or at least it is for me. But when I think about what is posture, it's not just holding one static position. The way I like to think of posture is like posture to me is like the sum average of all the options that you either have or don't have. Right. So I don't care if you're sitting in a forward neck, forward head with your sternum tucked down and your tailbone tucked under. I just need you to be able to get out of that too. you
right.
know? And people start to think about like one position as being the right position, where it's really like maybe what we need to start saying is more like postural bias. you know?
Well, and I think too, it's the language that we utilize. It, like you said, and I think a lot of this comes from, like you were talking about from the very beginning, that it's the wild west of rehab and fitness, and things are still we're still figuring it out. And
Oh, yeah.
we're maybe 10% of the way in to truly understanding
Yeah.
what works, what doesn't work, and getting past some of these egos. So there's a lot of work to do in the industry, both industries, and probably combining them as well. But that said,
Yeah.
like, I could totally agree that posture, it's more of a spectrum, if you would, than it is a fixed position. And
Definitely not a fixed position, hopefully.
exactly. Right. But and that's where I think postural bias, like, there's really it whenever I talk to people, I just try to explain exactly what you said. Like, posture isn't fixed. It is the millions of small little ranges of motion in between each fixed position that you're trying to achieve. And it's hard to conceptualize, you
It
know?
it's it
It,
it is hard to conceptualize because I think people grow up with ideas that are taught at a very young age. Like, you're in your grandma's house and she's like, "Sit up straight," you know?
mhm.
And, I mean, little things like that can have a huge impact in the psyche of someone's mind because, I talked about this in one of my videos, like, I was listening to an Alan Watts, talk, and Alan Watts is, like, a big thought leader back in the
Oh yeah.
'60s, and um, in kind of a spirituality realm. And he was saying, like, just started talking about posture, which I thought was funny, because here I am, I have a YouTube channel that talks a lot about posture. Geez, what happened there? And so we could dive into that a little later, but and so he talks about these postures, these ideas of postures being very stylized. So, in other words, if you were born in another time, you might not think that the air quotes correct posture is to stand up straight with your shoulders back, but we're living in the now, and that's what the style has been, or that's what style has been advocated over our lifetimes. And so even for someone who studies this stuff like I do and like you do, there's going to be times where it goes through our heads like, am I slumping too much or something?
Mhm.
And it's like, even if we can conceptualize that there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you have the other options available to you and preserved, there's still that underlying kind of deeply ingrained bias that you have from just being a kid that grew up when we did.
Right.
Um,
I want to walk around with my shoulders back and down. I want a big chest,
so
like
can you talk about that a little bit? Because you posted something like a week ago that talked about pulling your shoulders back and walking around like that for a couple of years. And so I've done the same thing. I had a phase like that too. And could you tell like how that happened, like how you got encouraged to do that, or thought that that was the right thing to do,
oh,
like how you stuck with it, what effect it had, and then how did you realize like, oh, okay, maybe not.
right. So quick and dirty. I hurt my shoulder because I was not programming well. I was 18, 17, 18 years old, just ego lifting like crazy, bench pressing, hurt my right shoulder. It was bugging me like crazy. So I go to a typical PT clinic, you're running the mill. I walk in, first thing they tell me is shoulders down and back. I take that idea and I just like, this is it. This is the holy
Yeah.
grail. I'm going to become the strongest person in the world. My bench is going to go up and I'm going to fix my shoulder. I'm a god. And then I took that idea and it just stayed with me. And, everything I looked up online and, shout out to Athlean X for ruining everything about posture. But, but that is
I gotta take
what
a
I
sip
would
of
say. Like,
water.
right. I've literally watched all those videos and it's like, do your face pulls, do this. And I just kept cranking my shoulders back. And
Yeah.
like you said, 2, 3 years down the line, I'm still having shoulder issues. And I mean, I would lay in bed and my shoulder would just ache and ache and ache. And at this point, I'm also having the beliefs, all of this stuff going on with the shoulder until finally I actually stumbled across Bod Mechanic. I don't know if you follow him or anything, but his name's Andreas. I can never, he has a Greek last name that I can never pronounce.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
he, I followed his page. He was based out of New York City. And I saw him doing a bunch of protraction drills and their
Yeah, yeah.
PRI drills.
Oh,
And I was
gotcha.
like, what the heck? And I saw him, take this bodybuilder through like a breathing exercise. And that guy's, along with my shoulders back and down, I also thought I had to do the sleeper stretch and
Oh god.
the capsule and get my shoulder internal rotation going.
Yeah, yeah, because that's the best way.
Right. Of course. And so, but I see him do that breathing drill with this guy who's, I mean, the guy's enormous. And that guy's shoulder internal rotation just, I mean, boom, down to the table.
Yeah.
I was like, what the fuck?
In the
What am
matter
I?
of seconds, right? Like,
Yeah. I was like,
yeah.
what am I doing? I'm sitting here tracting my shoulder blade, trying to like invert my spine at this point. And like, it's just ridiculous. What is that? And then, of course, I go down the rabbit hole of his information, and that got me into PRI. And then I finally just realized I just need to stop. Like, I just need to stop trying to control. I'm getting in the way of my own healing process. And then I started reading books like, Anti-Fragile, um,
Mm.
and looking into things like that, where it's just the more we intervene with a system, the more we tend to mess it up.
Oh my god, man. It's so incredible because it's like I I um I visualized in my head when I ran into your content. I go, I think this is a tale of two guys, one in Boston, one in Cincinnati, just going through like on like parallel tracks.
Mhm.
Um, because if I had to give you a quick and dirty on mine, right? I'll try to be quick. So had some injury related stuff going on. Mine was more migraine and vestibular and neck related, which I mean, we can talk about that at some point if you want, because I find that stuff to be fascinating, how like the sensory stuff ties in. But a lot of my issues were sensory right off the bat, like when I first started having issues. And so you go through PT, and then they give you like well, we're going to try the vestibular rehab, which is working on stuff like moving your eyes and moving your head in certain positions. And that wasn't really that effective. So they sent me to someone to work on like, posture and spine and whatever, you know, just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks essentially.
Right.
Um,
Basing
and
it off nothing.
yeah, based off nothing. Yeah. But, my mindset at that point was I need to go to a doctor to get a diagnosis so they can
Mhm.
tell me what's wrong with me so I can get a treatment for that diagnosis to fix me. That was my paradigm at the time, which I continued to hold for literally years, until even after I was out of PT school. So, anyways, I got the same spiel about needing to get my, traps stronger, especially. Well, you got a little kyphosis and you got to get the traps stronger, and just keep getting stronger. And so I was like, oh, strong? I'll get strong. And you know, like challenge accepted. I go to this personal training institute after I had air quotes graduated from PT. Well, you're too strong for PT, but you're not strong enough yet, so keep at it, type thing. And I go to this personal training institute that I thought I was going to be trained by someone,
Mhm.
and I ended up it was like a school to train to become a trainer. And I was like, "Oh, that's what this is about." Like my parents like enrolled me in this thing, right? And
Yeah.
so I showed up day 1 and learned that I was going to learn to be a trainer, right? So that's how I became a trainer, by the way. That's the real story of how I became a trainer, right? It was like a complete accident. And
Yeah.
so it was a 6-month program, and uh from the beginning of the program I had never lifted weights before ever. I was like 20, right? And by the end of the program, 6 months later, I had like probably like a 325-pound deadlift, you know? Like I was going for it. I was,
Yeah.
supplements, everything. I was full on. I went from like one of the guys in the program literally holding me. He was an ex-army guy,
Mm.
huge jack dude. Matt Austin, if you listen to this, you're the man. But he like literally he helped me get my first pull-ups by lifting my like whole body up. And by the end of the training program, I was easily doing 3 sets of 10. So like I got very strong in a short period of time. And looking back on it, I think it was some of the worst like self-destruction I could have done to myself because of the things that were ingrained in me in terms of what I thought I had to do those things correctly. So, for example, if the shoulder was back, it needed to be back more. Like
Mhm.
things like that where, now I think we'd look at like in a single arm row context, for example, well, let's keep one side somewhat open while the other side pulls back so we can get the spine to rotate a little bit more. So we're not just, frankly pushing ourselves forward. Cause at the time, I just didn't have a lot of good movement options. And so I got really good at limiting them, over those
Right.
6 months. And I think there was probably a way to do it at that point if I had emphasized different sort of technical points that I would have come out of that in a better place than I was. But these ideas about what is correct and what isn't, and to your point, like doing a bunch of face pulls and like let me do a lot of back and no chest because anything pushing is bad, right? Like and anything
Yeah.
pulling is good. Those paradigms just kind of set me back and until I literally it got to a point where I just kept doing that stuff until I was out of PT school. And then I was like, I'm a mess. I'm still a mess. Um, and maybe so it must have been about 6 months before I got out of PT school. I'm in this clinic and I'm a third year at this point. And there's a first year PT student in there, so what does he know? Um, but by the way, he's freaking brilliant. And you guys might know him, Mike Camperini.
Oh my
Um,
god.
yeah. So, the Camperini deadlifts and all that. So I'm talking to him on a lunch break one day, and I go, "Hey man, like I do this kind of crazy program where I just work the left inner thigh, but I do like the right glute, and you know, I'm really trying to like round my back, because I feel like it's like too arched, whatever. And then he's like, "So you're talking about PRI?" So he was the one who like turned me on to that whole thing, and then from there it was just like obsession 2.0. Let me become as obsessed with this as I was about keeping the shoulders back. And to your point, it wasn't until I let go of all that until I was like finally like, oh wow, now I'm really where I want to be.
Right.
But it took the pendulum swinging all the way one way and then almost all the way back the other way to then have it come down into the middle and realize like, oh, okay, there's just like an intelligent middle ground with all these factors that contribute to how one feels and moves that
Hmm.
need to be massaged and considered or not considered
Right.
in many cases. And over time feeling like, wow, like the removal of control around this process has been more important than the superimposition of more control to this
Right.
process, um, which is a huge paradigm shift. And it's really hard to get someone to understand what that means until they've experienced it, I think.
It's well, and that brings up the question too of how much should someone know? Do they need to know they're a left AIC? Do they need to know their lateral orientation and their head goes this way?
You know
Or
what?
they're go
It-
ahead.
this is so spot on. So I started my YouTube channel, thinking like, oh, I'm really into certain things and looking at things, and I want to share that information with people. And my mission around the channel was like, I want to take these concepts that are somewhat complicated, and I want to find a way to make them simple, so that if someone has something going on, um, they can find a way to improve it without having to know a ton, right?
Right.
Like give them like the Spark Notes version, like tie it more to sensation. Like this is, hey, if you feel like you have this, then you probably have this going on, and maybe you can try this exercise. And
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like that was my goal with the channel. And in having a channel, you have to find ways to make sure people click on your videos. And so you have titles and you have descriptions and you have thumbnails, and then you have the content structure itself. And the more that I've gotten feedback from people watching the videos, sometimes I look at it and I go, what have I done here? Have I contributed to a problem, that we have in people feeling like they should know more and knowing too much, or thinking they know
Right.
too much, or trying to really perseverate on that process of being a problem solver and seeing their body as a problem. And then sometimes I'll get the comment where someone's like, "Oh my god, I did this, and this relieved pain that I had for 10 years, and I feel so much better." And then I'm like, "Well, that's worth it." So it's this really hard balance where, do I think people need to know they're a left AIC? No. Have I had tons of patients that have started as a left AIC, ended as a left AIC, been in zero pain, back to all their activities and loving life at the end, still a left AIC? 110%. Right.
Right. It that's where I think, because I'm with you, because I made some of these videos, and even that's why I think too, people in the fitness industry and rehab industry look at the term posture, or anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt, whatever you want to say. And they look at these terms and it- I don't know what the word is, but they almost, they don't want you to talk about them anymore in a lot of ways when they're just descriptors. Like that's all it is. It's just it's linguistic. It's the way we're describing what we're seeing,
Yeah.
right? And instead, I think because of poor marketing on some other institutions' parts, not PRI specifically, but more like functional patterns. I'll call them out. I don't care. But
Sure.
and
I'm game for that. That's fine.
yeah, but you have these people who are just like demonizing this, and so now it's like you can't talk about posture. You can't talk about what you're just seeing in a lot of ways.
Right. And, I think this brings up a really good point as to the difficulty in making content in this area. Because, for example, somebody could, and this is something that I really have been evolving in my head over the last, year or two, is that when if I say like a lateral pelvic tilt, you
Mhm.
know, I could be referring to when I see that like hip hike or pelvic tilt more on the right side. I could be saying when I see it on the left side. If I
Right.
am seeing it on the left side, it could be like, okay, but to what degree and what is that person's structure and how does that influence what that looks like and what movement capabilities do they have and how does that change as they start to get more movement capabilities or do an
I
activity and lose some like these it's not one pelvic tilt, right? It's not even if it's a lateral pelvic tilt, it evolves, it changes. It's a moving target. It's like, this thing we're trying to observe in a quantum field of human movement.
mhm.
And so we make a video about the one way we're conceptualizing it in a certain context and try to describe it as such, and then for the people who that fits really accurately, that video is like a home run.
Right.
Absolutely helps them probably more than anything they've seen. But there's going to be someone else who has like, that same uh pelvic tilt, air quotes, same pelvic tilt, but it's evolved in a different direction. It's got some other stuff with it and it's not quite exactly the same thing, but we still need to find a way to hone in on like what's going on with these people biomechanically to see if that makes a difference. I'm not even going to say that it's ultimately always going to make a difference, but if you have a lens through which you can look that is biomechanically based, you can start to see patterns a little bit more clearly. And there's definitely a place for trying to be a little more precise when it
Mhm.
comes to what you're going to do from like an exercise selection standpoint or a loading scheme standpoint with
Right.
someone, that is useful. And it shouldn't be like taboo to describe these things, but people
It's
should know that it's not a one size fits all either.
right. And it's tough, man. Like you said, it's a tough. Like I literally haven't made. I've had so many requests to make a lateral pelvic tilt video, and I can't. I
Yeah.
I
Can't
have a
bring yourself to do
script.
it.
Yeah, I've made a script sort of to like talk through it, but it's going to be like a 2 hour video. If I really want to put out that information of like what it is, and it's like man, this is a book, like like there's just so much to it, a right versus a left. Like, do I make a video just about the left side or do I make a video just about the right side? What about the stuff in between? Like you said, it's just
Right.
there's so much like
Yeah. What happens when you got a left hiding underneath a right? You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
and do people even really need to know that stuff? And I,
And
I
that's
mean,
where to kind of bring this full circle and something that I've really tried to again, I try to take this empowerment approach, this positive approach. Like, what are people going to enjoy at the end of the day? Why are they trying to solve this stuff? If I go on to Google and I type in, how can I fix my lateral pelvic tilt? What am I worried about? I'm self conscious about it, potentially. Like, I don't like the way it looks.
mhm,
I
yeah,
might have pain and I'm trying to figure what the heck is going on.
yeah,
They're just trying to be a human being,
right,
And so,
yeah,
with them wanting to be a human, it's like, well, what is being a human then? Well, probably enjoying yourself and what little time we have here. So, if I
yeah,
know what I enjoy lifting and just messing around. Like that's what I like to do. That's why I talk about these postural things and everything because I want that to empower people and get them back into the gym, be fit, be the best version of themselves. So I think if we could sprinkle in like, yeah, okay, you got a lateral pelvic tilt, cool. Hey, let me try to entertain you a little bit and make you laugh throughout this video and just like point you in the right direction that hey, you should still be lifting and you should still be like trying the best version of yourself, take the blinders off in a way.
mm,
Like I think that can help with the information because it's always again, it's that light at the end of the tunnel in a way for people. They're not just like I can't tell you how many videos I'd go through and like do research on videos. It's like I'm going to talk about this topic, and I watch, and it's like you're so boring and depressing. Like
yeah, man,
this is
and
terrible. I don't want to watch this because then they just go down a rabbit hole of like negativity almost. But again, that's a whole
yeah,
nother. That's
and
harder to
yeah,
sell
yeah, I
too.
think there's a lot there. A couple of things. So one of them is the, you know, the presenter can make all the difference. And
For sure.
you know, people respond in an interesting way to negative information that they think pertains to them. So a lot of people respond really, really powerfully to negative information that they think applies to them, even more so than like positive information, right? So I think your what you just talked about is a perfect example of like, okay, we're going to highlight something that if you think this is what's going on with you, there might be an initial negative, emotion like, oh my god, yeah, I have that problem, but then maybe a little positive uh reaction of like, oh, and I can still lift, and I can, have a solution to this, and or I don't have to have a solution to this in order
It,
to continue to be a happy, healthy human being.
or
Like,
it doesn't define you.
yeah, well, and I think this, yeah, we could go into a conversation about labels here and about, that sort of thing. And people like labels because they allow them to contextualize things a little bit easier. And so it takes away an element of the unknown, or it seems to.
True.
But whether or not that label is actually accurately describing what's happening in reality, or if it's even useful at all to try to define something, is that actually going to be useful and helpful as the person who's, trying to get the help? Or is that something for us as rehab professionals? Let's us worry about the way we categorize things, and let
Hmm.
them more worry about things that can help them get into the process of doing and experiencing, and going through those changes. Like, I think about, I got two Gregs. I got the Greg who lives up here between his ears and behind his eyes and is going on a hamster wheel thinking all day about this. And then I got the Greg who's experiencing things like just without having to label or contextualize. So like that's like if I'm playing a sport or if I'm playing music at a high level, that kind of flow state experience. And I think when it comes to the gym, it's like, yes, you're going to go through a process of being conscious about things and learning them. But the thing that actually helps you ingrain that is like having a level of beginner's mind about what the actual experience is, and then getting it to a place where you can go into the gym and you can just know that like your form on whatever moves that you have worked on is going to be there, and you don't have to try to micromanage it and think about all these things. You're just going to be like, oh, I know when I'm feeling in the groove on my RDLs, for example. Like,
Right.
okay, I'm grooving this one out. I don't have to think about it. Some days you're going to go in and it's not going to feel as good. And then maybe, you spend a couple extra minutes and warm up. And then you go back and it feels good. It feels where it normally is. Maybe it doesn't, but
Right.
that's the variability of training. But at least you have some ability to experience them as they are, not as what your thinking brain is telling you they should be.
Mhm.
Like, so what happens for you if you don't feel your glutes in an RDL? Is that a bad day of training for you?
I keep going. I don't have enough time. I'm going on to the next exercise. It's like, oh, that
Right.
sucks. Like
You
maybe
know,
next time. Or
right. But if you go in with the belief that you have to feel your glutes in that RDL because that's
right.
the primary muscle that you're working, you got a muscle mindset and you're focused on working a muscle, you don't feel that sensation during that exercise. That makes you think you're doing it wrong. And then all of a sudden you've activated the problem solver again, who's trying to figure out, well, what are you doing wrong here? It's like,
Mhm.
well, how did that feel? Did it feel good? Well, yeah, I felt comfortable.
It was fun.
And yeah, it's totally good. Like, and how are the reps and the load like relative to what you usually do? Oh yeah, they're progressing. Okay, did it feel as good as it felt a week ago, even though you're progressing? Yeah, great, perfect.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
You're on the right track.
You don't need to have a certain sensation in your glute to, tell you that you're doing the exercise correctly.
Right. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I haven't felt my glutes. And then the next day I'm sore as all get out. I'm like, oh man, I didn't think I actually hit them. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
well,
it,
exactly.
and that's where, man, it's so hard, like to just try to be able to use language to describe experiences that like because again, we've both been the guy who's tried to set their shoulder blade and done all that and problem solve. And I can't tell you how many times I've done a bench press and I didn't quite feel my right pec versus the left, or my scapula wasn't in the
Yep.
right spot, I thought.
Yeah.
But like you said, it was fine. Like I put up a PR, but I was more worried about what my shoulder was doing the whole time. And so it's hard to be able to tell people, especially when there's so much, like if you look at YouTube for the past 10 years, it's been mind muscle connection. It's been posture can wreak havoc on and cause injury. And it's like, man, that's just not the case. And it's such a soupy, gross gray of what is actually like the human body and training and rehab. And I guess if there's anything to tell people, I I don't know. Do you have like a little highlight that you would tell people, like going through and trying to search for this stuff and they have all of these like sort of beliefs? Like what would you say to someone? Like what is like, give me a, what is it? Give me a sound bite. Am I putting you on the spot?
Oh, for a soundbite? Yeah, probably. But so there's this, what is the name of the story? It's a parable. It's a parable from the Buddha. It talks, yeah, I know we're getting deep.
I like where this is going.
What is the name of this, right? So I don't want to get this wrong. So it's the parable of the poisoned arrow. Okay. Are you familiar with this one?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm excited.
So essentially, it's this man is wounded with an arrow that's smeared with poison, right? And so essentially what he does is the idea of the story is this man's laying there with this poisoned arrow through him, and he wants to know, okay, who made the arrow? What type of arrow is it? Where did it come from? Well, the person who's going to remove the arrow, like, where are they trained or whatever, you guys can go on Wikipedia and read it if you want the full thing. But the idea is that person doesn't need to know any of those things. And then in the end, them needing to know those things is what leads to their demise. Like, I'm not going to let you take this arrow out of me until I know exactly who made it and all these characteristics of it. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to let you help me until I know everything about if I'm a left AIC or not. Like, okay, we got a lot of beliefs to break down there.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's such a good point.
It's the epitome of getting in your own way. It's like, there's a balance that we have to strike as rehab professionals and fitness professionals as to, how do we get someone to realize what they're doing with those behavioral patterns while still allowing for a client or patient directed treatment or program, because you do want them to be that active participant and contribute and be invested in the process. But if they take it to that next step where you can tell they're getting in their own way, then how do you help them break out of that behavioral pattern? Because it's not serving them, right? And I think we need to be sensitive to that while still being sensitive to trying to explain to them clearly what's going on with them. And if we know what an AIC pattern is and they want to know if they've got some of it going on, we might be able to say, well, yeah, your tests would kind of like match up with that, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, let's put that within a greater context of like how much that actually matters or doesn't matter,
Right. Definitely.
But there's a lot of content out there that's really convincing in certain topics, that being one of them, especially in our sort of space. So when people get into an idea that they think explains what's going on with them, it's really hard to let that go, because the thing that they haven't found in the traditional medical journey is that answer that makes sense to them, that validates what they're feeling. So when they find something that does validate what they're feeling, even if that belief is not serving them, it becomes really hard to break that belief.
Right.
And I think that comes back to just people are uncomfortable with uncertainty and they don't like to not know, and they like to be in control. And it's this weird thing where the harder you try to, grasp on, the more it just escapes from your hand, and you try to hold on to it. And then one day you just say, oh, I can't anymore. I got to let this go. I'm over it. And then like the next day you're like, oh, I feel like I'm moving a little better today. What's going on here?
See, for those type of people, and this is, I'll let people in on a secret. When people are starting to like perseverate or they're getting in their own way, those are people I try to find the most intense activity they can do without pain. So like if that's an AMRAP of some hamstring sliders or something, to where they just get out of their own head and they're actually like in the present and realizing it's like, you got through that. Like you hit 24 of these. You thought you could only do 3. And then they're having this like, it's like they're not even thinking about what they were, the problems, the who made the arrow, where the poison came from. They're just looking at like, oh, I got through it. Like, holy crap, that sucked. But I'm better because of it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's I truly believe that a lot of this, like we perseverate and we think about all these issues, and like you said, like the poison arrow, where it came from, all this. And it's more what's the word I'm looking for? We live in a society where everything is so like we're taken care of, that it's good that we're able to think and process and like dive in. Like I can go on Google and research all these different topics, but at the same time, like we're spoiled in a lot of ways and we get stuck in our own heads about these topics versus actually taking actionable steps to resolving it.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you can take anything away from listening to this conversation today, it's sort of like try to find out from a pragmatic standpoint what actually moves the needle forward, because that
Right.
the proof is in the pudding. It's in your ability to actually progress forward. How you get there, that's a big question mark, right?
There's so many
There's
different
20 ways
ways.
to Watertown. Like,
Yeah.
it's not one path. There's not one correct way, but you do need to be progressing forward.
Mhm.
And if Googling is, part of that and is actually moving the needle forward, okay, fine. But you need to be real with yourself. If you're doing that behavior over and over and over again, and you're not getting any return and it's stopping you from taking action that's pragmatically going to actually move the needle forward, then you need to really reconsider where the roots of that behavior are coming from. Is that based on a deeper assumption about, well, if I know this, then I'll be able to fix it? Is that coming from a different core belief? You know what I
Right.
mean? It goes back to kind of like almost that hierarchical cognitive behavioral sort of approach to thought. I think the same applies within the movement context as well. It's like, okay,
100%.
so where are these behaviors coming from that ultimately hold you back? Like, so many people just never get out on the jog. You know, so many people never get to the deadlift. They're like, well, let me stay in this zone where I'm doing like, these floor based exercises
Well,
where
it's
I
comfortable there. It's what they
feel
know.
comfortable and safe. And it's like, but you've been doing that for a while, and you're kind of at the same spot. How do we get you to progress forward?
Right.
You know, and then people want to think, well, I got to get this perfect first. It's like, if you're looking for perfection, you're gonna stay right where you're at. It's like,
Exactly. It,
it's
too bad. It's so
hard.
sad. Like you're human. Like it's not happening.
Yeah, like how many times have you put up a video on your YouTube channel and thought that was perfect,
Never.
right?
I try not to make them perfect because I know like I'm probably gonna come back in like a couple of years and redo those videos anyways because I'll know something better.
Right. Yeah. And it's so funny because you mentioned earlier about you being like a perfectionist. And I was like,
I've had to
I don't
grow out of that for sure.
I was gonna say, I don't buy that. I've been looking at your content enough to know that that can't be the case anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
I like my time. We'll say that. Like I'm a perfectionist about my time. So if that means that I can make memes within 5 seconds and that it still gets the point across and I still can talk to people and run a business, then I'll do that. And then I have my time.
yeah, yeah, I hear you. Should we rapid fire Q&A and then wrap it up?
Dude, yes. And I think one thing I do want to add to your last point there is that
Sure. Go ahead.
I always like to tell people and keep in mind that the human body and the blueprint of it has been around for a very, very, very long time. And that the problems that you're dealing with, like we made up all of these problems, like we put the names to them. like that shoulder pain is now this, or like you can dive in deeper and deeper and deeper. You can talk about the specific muscles. Like humans came up with those problems, but the human body's been around way longer than the definition or the names that we put on this stuff.
Right. And everything is so context dependent too, right? So, you know, if you rip a PR deadlift and you wake up and your back's kind of sore, you're probably going to feel pretty accomplished. If you sat on the couch and didn't do anything, you wake up, your back's kind of sore, you're going to think maybe you have a problem, right? But it's like, what's the difference between sensation A and sensation B at the level of sensation? Maybe not much, right? So, I think a lot of these framing effects are at play, whereas if we think something's a problem and we frame it as such, it's a problem, even though the sensation itself might be exactly the same as what you might feel like after you go out and play a sport that you really love. And then you frame it as, I'm sore because I played a sport that I really love. It's the same, could be the same exact sensation though, and I see that so often where it's like you have this sensation that you want to get rid of. But if you actually paid closer attention to that sensation in and of itself, is it really that bad? Or there's some other pleasant sensations that are occurring at the same time that could take up more bandwidth within your consciousness that might offset that slightly unpleasant sensation. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I don't know about you, but even though I know, sort of, I think I'm reaching the upper limit of things I can know biomechanically about how to reposition my body or restore X range of motion or whatever it might be. I still am going to have times where I get, my little aches and my little twinges that are going to happen regardless. And it's like, I think we need to be a little bit, we got to tread lightly in this area of like, there's the mindset of fix where everything's perfect and you feel like, a 5-year-old where it's just like, nothing hurts and you like feel perfect or whatever.
Yeah.
There's that level. And then the other level is sort of like on the flip side, we're not encouraging people to get into a situation where you're ignoring something that's very uncomfortable. Right. But if you are the person that we've been talking about for this last little segment here, you want to just really try to explore that sensation on the level of pure experience without framing effects, if possible. And that's where the mindfulness piece, I think, for me at least, was the biggest thing that helped me move from where I was before to where I have been, over the last couple of years. So
I don't think we're going to do a Q&A after that one.
Is that right? Yeah.
That was a good little mic drop right there. I liked it.
Cool.
And honestly, all the Q&As were about pelvic floor dysfunction and like super intense questions that we don't have time to go over, unfortunately. So I do.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time, folks.
Unfortunately. So we'll do this. Greg, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you doing this, taking time out of your day. How about you tell us where we can find you? Tell us all about your YouTube channel and if you have any cool services or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. So you guys heard it first here. I'm going to be opening up a group coaching program in June. I've been doing mainly one-on-one, so the one-on-one stuff will still be available now. And within that program, we're very much integrating a lot of what we talked about today, whether it comes to beliefs or, certain breathing related things are in there too. I know people love that. So we talk about that. But the main idea with my movement coaching program is one-on-one working with people to go from, having some aches and pains or some barriers with exercise to getting back in the gym and lifting, and getting back to the activities you like. So that's my main jam these days, but we're going to be transitioning to a group coaching type model in June. So definitely pay attention for that. You'll be seeing more about that soon. You can see me on the YouTube. I think those that know the YouTube will know it's a lot of posture oriented stuff that will also likely be changing in the next couple of months as well. So if you like posture, go ahead and subscribe to it now. If you don't really like posture that much, but you want to hear more about kind of the stuff we talked about today, go ahead and subscribe and just hit the notification bell.
There you go. Good plug. Cool, man. Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you.